Right now, though, let's turn our attention to other stories, perhaps affect more of our lives. And they are migration and, of course, Brexit. Let's talk to Stephen Wolfe, who's director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity and, of course, a former Brexit MEP. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julie.
Thank you so much for joining us. Two interesting stories here. First, we'll talk about the Prime Minister, what he has to say about legal immigration. So much focus, you and I have spoken pretty much, every few days about the huge numbers of people arriving illegally, those Channel migrant boats on those dinghies. And I mean, anyone sane thinks you want to stop those. It's what you do with the people once they arrive that is the dispute right now. But also the focus has now gone on legal immigration, particularly legal net immigration. Now, the figures are going to come out next week. We're expected to top for annual net legal migration 700,000 more people in the country than previously. Actually, there's a big question mark that actually those figures have gone up a lot since they were calculated, and it's closer to 1 million, and that next year it's going to be 1.1 million. This, though, bizarrely, after a 2019 manifesto pledge from the Prime Minister, as was Boris Johnson, that overall numbers will come down. And at that time, it was only 226,000 a year, and he still said it should come down. The Prime Minister right now, Rishi Sunak, on a plane to the G7 summit in Japan, says he wants to cut legal net immigration. But he's overseen a massive rise in it. And am I not right in thinking he has the power to cut it today if he wants to?
Yes, I mean, the Prime Minister does have powers today. I mean, a lot of the decisions about how many people come have been decided by the Prime Minister. Over 460,000 students are now here, along with about 130,000 of their dependents. That was a government policy. If they wanted to cut that, they could say that we'd have no dependents. Similarly, with skilled workers and unskilled workers that have been allowed to come under the skilled visa system. I know that sounds odd, but by reducing the amounts of the people that can come here to about 23,000, that can encourage those that some people would regard as unskilled. Yeah. You've got 150,000 dependents come with them there. So the government could immediately shave off 300,000. And there is no need, if one argues that we've had 200,000 Ukrainians and 50,000 Hong Kong citizens being allowed to come here in the past year, that they could work too if they were allowed to. So there is scope for the Prime Minister to cut, and there's scope for others to say that they can go and work elsewhere without increases in
But listen,
legal
people have been very welcoming of the idea of, the Hong Kongers, but also Ukrainian, largely women with young children coming to this country and, doing the right thing by both of those groups of people. It's a huge numbers of people who are coming, as economic migrants. And as you say, often on well below average income, and bringing dependents. So, a man or woman bringing, nearly always the man is the earner in these scenarios, bringing a non-working wife and children. No extra schools, no extra hospitals, no extra doctors, no extra roads, no extra houses. A lot of people just wondering, where on earth are all these people living?
Well, this is why we've seen massive increasing housing being built across the country. And here's the irony.
Well, not enough.
We are building around 165,000 houses a year, which is more than we've ever done. That's 1.65 million houses in the past 10 years. And now we're being told by Rishi Sunak that we need to open the doors to, or rather Jeremy Hunt, that we need to open the doors to allow more builders to come in.
Yeah.
That seems a kind of system. Let's keep building, bring more builders in, keep building, let's bring more builders in. Yeah. Rather than saying, let's upskill our own workers and improve technology.
Exactly, and especially as we know, a lot of the newer jobs that have been created tend to be, as people say, more feminised jobs, whereas actually our young men are crying out for work, good, respectable work, and by the way, which pays very well as well. I mean, that's the thing. Why are we not upskilling our youngsters? This, by the way, all at the same time as Keir Starmer has been asked about if he becomes Prime Minister, what does he want in terms of Brexit? And he says he wants a closer trading relationship with the EU, and he wants to basically reopen Brexit talks. Now, we've already had renegotiation after renegotiation after renegotiation. He's speaking out after Vauxhall and other car makers said they want easier trade with the EU or they'll lose business. But at the end of the day, if he wants to renegotiate, we know this is man. He's a staunch, not just Remainer, but Remoaner. He may say now he's not reneging on the EU, Brexit vote, but he spent 4 or 5 years trying to do that. So I'm not quite sure why we would trust him on that. But fundamentally, you can't have more freedom in trade unless you agree to the other pillars of that freedom of movement from the EU, which is freedom of movement of people. That they come, that's the deal. It doesn't matter how nice Keir Starmer is with Emmanuel Macron, and they have croissant for breakfast at the Élysée Palace, and everyone's all chummy. Don't worry, that awful Brexit Tory government's gone. It's Keir Starmer now. You can do business with me. Macron is still going to say no.
Oh, absolutely. Macron's going to say none, and the EU is going to insist that there's more openness in terms of the European citizens that are coming in. Bear in mind that under the European Union's the scheme that we adopted for EU citizens, we still have about 6.2 million people who had the right to stay here, and we can see that in the numbers. So the point about Keir Starmer is this is a message being sent out to those in the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats that I'm still a Remoaner at heart. Yeah. I'm still going to move the dial closer to returning to the EU. And of course, once we give EU citizens the vote, then we have the opportunity to have a new referendum. I'm being told by those within circles in the Labour Party that the idea is we get in power and within 2 years we'll have a referendum and we'll say it's the people that have forced it to do so. And those Conservative MPs who were Remainers as well will then be able to argue, look, we never took you back into the EU. It was that nasty Labour Party. But of course, there has been movement in the Northern Ireland Protocol. The fact that we're now opening doors with the city to have negotiations on rules that match the EU, and we have a committee of MPs who talk regularly with EU. It's all closer and moving the dial towards.
But the point is, this was all part of the design, wasn't it? David Cameron was only ever dragged kicking and screaming, even though he claimed to be Eurosceptic, to actually having and promising an EU referendum. He only had one because, well, he didn't think he'd have to have one when he pledged in 2015, because he thought he'd be back in coalition and he had to hold the referendum. He absolutely was convinced, and he got everyone on side, all the major political parties, every business leader, half the newspapers, everything. He basically had the establishment on his side to try and win that referendum. When we on the Brexiteer side won it, the plan was, well, we'll just kind of scupper it. We'll make sure it never actually happens. And we went through all that wrangling, 2016 all the way through to 2019. Then, and the Conservative government was elected under Boris Johnson to, quote, get Brexit done. And to his credit, he did get Brexit done. But then, of course, with all the excuses of lockdowns and COVID and all of that, we managed to actually not do a very good Brexit. So we've taken all the downsides, and yes, there are downsides in, making it more difficult to trade with our close EU partners. That's the EU's choice, by the way, not ours, but that's the deal they want to make. That's up to them. But the key thing here is that, that we've not had any of the benefits of it, because we're not, other than the fact that when our government does do things like they're doing right now and whatever Keir Starmer does, we at least know it's them making those decisions. They're not forced into it by Brussels. They're doing it of their own free will, and we get a chance to punish them. But at the end of the day, most political parties, virtually the entire establishment and most of the media in this country didn't want us to Brexit. They've been trying to stop Brexit, and they're going to try and turn Brexit on its head and go back into the EU. I mean, they've always wanted to do that. Do you think they're going to manage it?
I'm afraid I've become less optimistic over this past year, watching what's happened with the slow movements in the background. And the Northern Ireland Protocol decision was one of the final key points for me to make me realise that they're actually winning. And I suspect now that they feel that they've got the momentum on their side to hold that referendum. Labour coming in power and giving votes to EU citizens will be the final nail in the coffin. And that's why it's important, if those who are Brexiteers, not to allow that to happen. But again, I think we were in really difficult lands here, and it's hard to be optimistic about it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Stephen Wolfe, really appreciate you joining us. Going to get Candice Holdsworth's thoughts on this just a couple of moments.